And God knew we would have such a hard time with money. That's why he spoke about prayer 500 times, faith 500 times. You know how much he spoke about finances? 2,000 times. Because he knew we would have a tough time with it. So I'm going to give you God's entire plan today. I don't want you to wig out. Because I'm going to give you a lot of information. And some of you, I don't want you to get in the middle of this message and feel discouraged and say, I can never do this. I want to show you by the end of the message how you can, okay? But I'm going to give you the whole plan because this is the last week we're going to talk about it. So the whole plan, if I were to just kind of write it in a synopsis, here's what it is. It's God is the source. The tithe puts him first. Learn to save, invest, and live off the rest. That's God's plan for money. Matter of fact, let's say it together. You did so well last week. So on the count of three, let's say this together. Please don't disappoint me. I don't want to do the whole rewind thing, okay? Ready? 1, 2, 3. God is the source. The tithe puts him first. Learn to save, invest, and live off the rest. It even kind of sounds catchy, doesn't it? I can see a rap song coming out of that. Tithe is the first. No? I think it could be catchy. All right, I'm the only one. It's okay. Just wait till I write it as the number one hit, and I'm going to tithe off of it too. Okay, so this is God's plan for money. Let's break this down then. If this is God's plan, let's look at what this means. God is the source, okay? God's the source. In the book of Malachi, they had forgotten that God was the source. They were living outside of God's provision and protection. Why? Because they had forgotten that God was the one that gave it to them all. God was the one that provided you the job. God's the one that provided you with the opportunity. God's the one that provided you with the herd of sheep. You have forgotten the one that gave it to you all. And this is why he says in Malachi 1:6 something. He says this verse. He says, a son honors his father and a servant his master. He's saying your earthly sons are honoring to their fathers, and your earthly servants are honoring to a master. And then he says, now I'm a father, and you can hear it in his voice. Where is my honor? You can almost feel it. And then he says this, and if I'm a master, and he is, we call him master, where is my respect? And the reason you can kind of feel the tone of anger and frustration in his voice is because he's a loving God. He cares for his people. He didn't want them to live like this. And what they were doing is they were bringing the tithes, which were animals in those days, to be sacrificed. And they were supposed to bring the best unblemished animals. And you know what they were doing? They were bringing the ones they didn't even want to the temple. They were bringing the ones with one eye, with 3 legs. Oh, that one's bad. Give it to God. Kind of reminds me of the old joke about the dog. They put a poster up. Lost dog, 3 legs, blind in one eye, missing one right ear, tail broken, recently castrated, answers to the name of Lucky. That's what they were bringing God. That's why his voice sounded like that when he says, where's my honor? Where's my respect? He was indicating, you've forgotten me. I'm no longer the source. Deuteronomy 3:18 says this, but remember. Now that's one of the key words, but remember how easy it is for us to forget God. Remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. Somehow along the way, we think that what we got it because of us. I see it happen all the time in church. Someone, pastor, pray for me to have a wife. They get a wife, they go on out of the church. We forget, we don't remember that it was God that gave us that. It was God that gave us that blessing. It was God that gave us a spouse. It was God that gave us the health. It was God that gave us the ability to go to work, the ability to have the skill that we have, the ability to drive that car. Now, some of us, we wish he would have gave us more ability to, right? I've seen your driving. Some of you scare me. That's why I get here early. But he says, remember the Lord God. He's the one that gave it to you. He's saying, remember the source. Say, he's the source. Your job is not your source. You can lose your job. Your savings is not your security. You can lose your savings. Your income is not your source. You can lose your income. Your source should be your Savior because you can't lose him, right? And so when we put money where it needs to be put, it remains money and God remains God. But we must remember that he is the source. This is why we understand that the first step is realizing that. The second step, if you're writing these down, remember, it's the tithe puts him first. Now, what's the purpose of tithing? Deuteronomy 14:23 says it, and I don't even need to explain it because it says it. The purpose of tithing is to teach you to always put God, you say it with me, in your life. I mean, that is as clear as it gets. The purpose of tithing is to always to keep God first in your life, to teach you to always put it, no matter how much he gives you, that God is first. Now, if you missed out last week, tithe means tenth. It means the first tenth of your income belongs to God, so that money stays money and God stays God. And that's what it is. And it's an act of worship just as much as praying and music and all that, okay? Because God doesn't work in second place. Now watch this. I want to give you 3 pieces of advice from the richest man in the world that ever lived. Pretty interesting, huh? I have coffee with him every morning. His name is King Solomon. Over in the book of Proverbs every morning since I was a 14-year-old kid. The richest man in the world gave us 3 pieces of money advice. The first piece of money advice, he talks about this issue of tithing. Solomon, what would you do with money? Well, Brent, I would honor the Lord by giving him the first part of your income. That's the tithe. And he will fill your barns with wheat and barley and overflow your wine vats with the finest wines. He's saying, I would put God first. Now, if Elon Musk, if we were to sit down with him and say, Elon, give us advice, I wonder how many of us would take it if he said, hey, put God first. But somehow ancient Solomon, he's too far back there. I don't know about that. I don't know if it worked. Solomon, let me tell you, had so much wealth that he could burn SpaceX to the ground if he wanted to. Just like many of the Teslas that are catching on fire. Okay. But he says the first bit of money advice is put God first. Tithe to the local church. Remember Malachi's days, why they weren't being blessed is they had stopped tithing. Remember he said this in Malachi? He said, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. That means the local church, so that God's work can be done God's way. Notice he said bring. The reason he says bring is because he gave it to us. It's not ours. We don't own it. It's on God's loan to us while we're here on earth. If someone has it before you and someone has it after you, it's not yours. It's on God's loan, right? So he says bring it, so we can either bring it or we can steal it. Because he gave it to us, right? We can bring it or take it. Now, go back to this verse here. I want to show you something else. He also says there may be food in my house. Test me now on this. I mentioned this last week, but it's the only place in the Bible that he says, test me. Everywhere else, he says, do not test the Lord your God. In this spot, he said, I know you're going to have a hard time. I know you've got bills. I know you maybe became a Christian later on, and now I've already got my bills and everything's coming in, and now you're saying, put 10% first goes to God? It's going to be hard. And he realizes that. So he says, test me. Test me. Watch what he follows up with. See if I will not open up the windows of heaven and pour out for you a blessing until it overflows. He says, test me and I'll bless you until it overflows. I love that he didn't say, pour out for you money until it overflows. Because as I said last week, how many of you agree that there's some things that money can't buy? Money can't buy my health. Money can't buy a restoration in a relationship. Money can't buy peace of mind. Money can't buy a peace in my heart when I'm grieving. I love that he said, I'll know what you need. And I'll bless you in the area that you need until it overflows because you've partnered with me, because you've put me first. Now watch this. The next verse says this. Then I will rebuke the devourer for you so that it will not destroy your fruits of the ground, nor will your vine in the field cast its grapes, says the Lord your God. You know what he's saying here? He's saying, I'll rebuke the things that will devour your wealth. I often wonder when we get to heaven, we're only going to know, those of us that are tithers, how many times that car would have broke down if we didn't tithe. How many times I can't stand it. Every time I turn around, this car broke down. Could it have broke down 10 more times had God not rebuked the devourer? Washing machines broke. It lasted 5 years. Was it only going to last a year? But he rebuked the devourer. But the second piece of money advice that Solomon, the richest guy in the world, who I have coffee with every morning, says is, I say, okay, Solomon, give me advice number 2. Richest person in the world, tell me what you would do next. He says, put God first. Second, the wise man saves for the future. But the foolish man spends whatever he gets. He'd say, Brent, tithe and learn to save. Pay yourself. Tithe and pay yourself. You know, my father used to teach me that. He would teach me, he'd say, Brent, make sure you pay yourself. When I first got my first job and I was just washing cars for people and I was making money, he said, hey, make sure you tithe, but then have another envelope. He said, put an envelope that says God on it. Put an envelope that says Brent on it. And then the rest, learn to live off that. He said, don't just go spend all your money and squander it on McDonald's and and Mexican food, which I could so do because I love Mexican food. And he said, pay yourself. And he used to teach me a plan that sounded like an old school phone plan. He called it 10-10-80. He said, give God 10%, save 10%, learn to live off 80. I said, okay. And you know that's a great financial rule for success because John D. Rockefeller used this as what Forbes magazine said. John D. Rockefeller, if you don't know who he was the first guy in 1916 to be a billionaire, the first billionaire. We talked about the difference between a billionaire and a millionaire last week. Remember, a million seconds is like, 11, 12 days? A billion seconds is like 32 years. Big difference between a millionaire and a billionaire. Did you know that $1 billion back in 1916 is the sum of $30 billion today? It's more than Bill Gates and a few of the richest men in the world. How did he do it? The 10-10-80 plan. Same plan. And here's what many people think. They said, well, if I had $1 billion, I'd tithe too. But here's what John D. Rockefeller said. He said, I never would have been able to tithe the first $1 million I've made if I had not tithed my first salary, which was $1.50 per week. I tell you, young people, if you start soon on God's plan, you never know what he can do with your life. You never know. And so learn to save. Now, the third or the fourth part of this is, remember we talked about this. We said he's the source. Put him first. Learn to save. The next was what? It was invest. Learn to invest. There's a story in the Bible that Jesus actually encouraged investing. It's the story where, remember, the master had servants and the master was on a trip and the master left his money with his servants and he left different amounts according to their ability to manage wealth. It's a picture of Jesus, okay? Remember, he's the master, we are his servants. So it's a picture of us. And he says, I'm gonna give this one $5,000 hypothetically, give this one, $3,000 or $2,000 hypothetically, and give the one worker just one bag of money worth $1,000. Because he knew he couldn't trust this one as much as he could trust this one, and he knew he could trust this one more than he could trust that one. And so what he did is he went on a journey, and then he came back, and he checked up on his money. And he said, hey, I want to check up with you. And you know what happened? The one with 5 doubled it. And they celebrated is what Matthew talks about. He said, well done, and he celebrated. The one with 2 went and doubled it. He said, great job of celebrating. The one with 1 dug a hole and put it in there and said, I was fearful to lose your money. And here's what the Bible says in verse 27. We're going to jump to 27 because 26 is a little harsh. But I'll tell you what he says. He says, you wicked, lazy servant. That's what Jesus said. He said, you wicked and lazy servant. Then he goes on to 27. He said, why didn't you just deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. So God over here uses this to talk about investing. Not only do we to invest our finances, our treasures, but the Bible is clear on this, that we are to invest our time and our talent here on earth to make a difference in eternity. God doesn't care how much we possess. You know what he cares about? He cares about people. He cares about souls that will live on forever in eternity. That's why he says in Matthew 6:19, he says, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, which is souls, right? The difference you make in people's life will neither moth nor rust or destroy, and thieves can't break in and steal. I want you to know, if you've ever given a dime to Cascade Hills, that you have a bank account in heaven and you have made a deposit. You're storing up treasures in heaven where it matters. Now the last part of this, and I'll run through this quickly, is learn to live off the rest. Learn to live off that. This begins when you know your state. When I don't like using this word, the B word. Not the B word you're thinking about, the B word, budget. This learns when we learn to budget and we learn the state of our financial affairs. This is what Solomon says. He says, advice number 3, Brent, you want advice? Yes, sir, I do. I want advice, Solomon. He says, know the state of your flocks. Now, back then, that's where they got their money, by the amount of flocks they had. Today, we would not say know the state of our flocks. We would say know the state of our stocks. Know the state of our financial affair, what comes in, what goes out. And he says, put your heart into caring for your herds, for riches don't last forever, and a crown might not be passed to the next generation. This is where the Financial Peace University, the Dave Ramsey class, if you'll sign up for a day, this is where it can help you. Because for me personally, I was doing some of this stuff, but doing it in the wrong order. I thought I was winning, but I was doing it in the wrong order. Dave Ramsey will break it down in what's called baby steps. And you'll be able to say, you know what, here's how I can do things, get out of debt and live off the rest. Now, I know some of you today are thinking, I can't pay my bills. You're telling me to tithe 10%. You're telling me to save. You're telling me to invest and live off the rest. You are you live in a different parallel universe because I have nothing left. There is no rest. There's nothing. And I want to tell you something. Don't get discouraged because you're looking at the whole staircase. Imagine there's a 20-stair staircase right here. How would you get to the top? Would you just jump right to the top? No. You'd fall down backwards, hurt yourself, and then you'd be discouraged, right? What do you do if you're going to climb 20 steps up there? You're going to take, what, one step at a time. All I'm asking you to do is don't get discouraged. I just gave you God's entire plan on how to win with money for life. I'm not telling you to go out here today and do that. You're thinking, I could never do that. Your step, your call to action is to tithe and put God first and get involved in the Dave Ramsey class. And they will tell you when it's time and how to take the next step. And many of you don't even realize that most people get out of debt quicker when they get in this class than you would even imagine. You're thinking, oh, it'll take 5 years, 6 years. It may, and that's fast. Most people in 18 months have everything paid off except their house. Mind-blowing. You can live a different life. Your family's life, your whole family tree can be changed. Your children, their children, all that. If you would say, you know what, I'm just going to take the first step. And I hope this doesn't discourage you. I want this to encourage you. You can win with money. You understand that? Can you imagine? I don't know why I used to remember when I was going after paying off my stuff and paying off everything. People would say, well, just keep that debt-free thing, keep that carrot dangling over your head. I'm like, that makes no sense. No one likes carrots. Dangle a piece of chocolate cake or something over it, right? But can you imagine just for a moment, I want you to imagine this. Imagine you're totally debt-free. Imagine you have no car payment, no credit card, no student loan, no house payment. Just for a second, you ever play the game, What If I Won the Lottery? I'll be honest, you ever play that game? No, you're better believers than me. I would never play that game. I do. I'll be riding down the road and I'll sit at 500 and I say, what if I won the lottery? What would I do? And you get all excited and you feel like it's real for a moment. Who would you give it to? What would you buy? What if you were debt free? Some of you, your whole facial expression has just changed. It was like, wow, you can be. God promises to bless what he's put in his word. I've seen too many people that were far worse than you are with money than your situation. Because it's not that you're bad with money. It's that you just never were taught. But if you get in here, he teaches and you take the first step, that's the first step to victory. I want that for you. The question is, how bad do you want it? Because I know I do this every year. There'll be many people that's great. But there's going to be some of you that say, I'm doing it. I'm sick of this. I'm doing it. And you will be the people that come back years later, a year later, whatever it may be, and say, hey, let me tell you this is where I'm at. And I can't wait to celebrate that with you.